The boy stopped breathing just before sunset. Merritt Holloway felt his small chest go still against her back as she climbed the last slope of Iron Crown Ridge. She dropped to her knees so hard that sharp stones cut through her wet skirt. "Ren." No answer. She pulled the shawl loose and turned him toward the fading light. His face looked pale beneath the dust. His lips had lost their color. A thin line of rainwater ran from his hair to his cheek. Merritt pressed her ear against his chest. Nothing. Then his body jerked. A dry cough tore through him. He dragged in one weak breath, followed by another. Merritt bent over him and held the back of his head in both hands. "That is it," she whispered. "Keep doing that." The wind pushed across the ridge, carrying the smell of snow. Behind her lay 3 days of hard walking, a seized wagon gate, a flooded creek, and every road that could lead a Denver debt collector to her. Ahead stood a wall of gray limestone. No cabin. No smoke. No sign that another person had ever lived there. Only a rough map folded inside her dead husband's medical book, and one line written by her father 18 years earlier. There is always an opening in the rock if a person knows how to look. Merritt lifted Ren again. Her legs shook under his weight. She had carried 42 pounds of tools and food from Silver Fork. She had also carried a 5-year-old boy whose cough sounded too much like the one that had ended his father's life. The food might last 4 days. The cold would arrive sooner. Still, she climbed. Before we follow her beyond that ridge, consider what you would have done with darkness falling, a sick child in your arms, and no roof anywhere in sight. Merritt did not have time to wonder. She needed stone above them before the first snow began. The wind stopped without warning. She noticed it before she saw the cave. One moment, the pines were bending and scratching against each other. The next, the air around her became still. She turned toward the bluff. A narrow opening waited behind a shelf of rock, no taller than her shoulder and half covered by dead brush. Merritt lowered Ren beside the entrance. "Stay close." He looked up at her through heavy eyes. "Is this the house?" She looked into the black opening. "No." His chin dropped. She touched his cheek. "But it can keep us alive tonight." She entered with her rifle first. The cave stretched perhaps 14 feet into the mountain. Its floor was dry gravel. The ceiling lowered near the back until she would have needed to crawl. No tracks marked the dust. No animal smell reached her. No bones. No fresh droppings. Merritt returned for Ren and carried him inside. She built a fire near the mouth using bark and broken pine branches. Smoke rolled along the ceiling before slipping outside. The small flames lit the cave in uneven flashes. Ren sat wrapped in the wool blanket, watching her cook cornmeal in a tin cup. "Papa made better supper," he said. Merritt stirred without looking at him. "Your papa had a kitchen." "And salt. We have salt." "A lot?" She glanced at the small cloth pouch. "We have enough." It was not true, but it was close enough for a child who needed to eat. She fed him first. He took each spoonful slowly. He had learned that during the journey. Slow bites made a small meal seem larger. Merritt watched his throat move as he swallowed. His skin still felt warm. Not burning. Not yet. When he finished, he leaned against her side. "Will that man find us?" Her hand stopped over the fire. Ren had heard more in Denver than she thought. "No." "How do you know?" Merritt added a branch to the flames. "Because he is looking for a widow on a train." Ren waited. She pulled the blanket tighter around him. "He is not looking for a woman inside a mountain." The boy nodded as though that answer settled everything. Within minutes, his head slipped against her arm. Merritt stayed awake. Outside, sleet tapped against the rock. Water ran from her boots and gathered beneath her heels. Her skirt had stiffened with cold. Her toes no longer hurt, which troubled her more than pain would have. She removed the wet stockings and held her feet near the coals. Then she opened the medical book. Her father's map was fixed inside the back cover. 3 circles marked the eastern face of Iron Crown Ridge. She had found the first. The other 2 stood higher on the mountain, too far for Ren. She looked toward the rear wall of the cave. The firelight reached it only in pieces. Pale limestone, flat in some places, rough in others, nothing more. For 5 days, Merritt worked as though the cave had been handed to her with written instructions. She cut pine boughs for a bed. She stretched the oilcloth across part of the entrance to stop the wind. She gathered deadwood before sunrise and set 2 small snares below the ridge. Wren carried the light branches. His steps were slow, but each morning he managed a little more. On the 4th night, the cave held enough heat for him to sleep without shaking. Merritt sat beside the fire and counted what remained. Cornmeal, bacon grease, salt, 8 rifle cartridges, 2 matches less than yesterday, $47 sewn into her skirt. Money could buy food in Silver Fork. It could not carry Wren back down the mountain. Her eyes moved to the rifle leaning against the wall. Then Wren turned in his sleep and closed his hand around the wooden horse his father had carved. Merritt stood. She fed the fire. The next afternoon she found the box. Her fingers touched wood beneath a loose stone near the cave mouth. She cleared the gravel with both hands. The box was small, dark with age, and sealed around the lid with black pitch. Someone had hidden it carefully. Someone who had expected the cave to be found. Merritt drew her knife and cut through the seal. Inside lay a steel chisel and a 3-pound hammer with a worn hickory handle. 2 letters had been carved near the grip. EV. Below them was a year. Wren crawled closer. Whose is it? Merritt lifted the hammer. The leather grip settled against her palm as though another hand had shaped it for hers. I do not know. She turned toward the back wall. A narrow line crossed the stone at shoulder height. She had mistaken it for a natural crack. Now, with the afternoon light falling sideways through the cave, it looked too straight. Merritt walked closer. She placed her palm against the limestone and tapped it with her knuckles. Solid. She moved her hand a few inches. Tapped again. The sound came back lower. Not the hard knock of stone. Something waited behind it. Wren stood beside the bed, holding his wooden horse against his chest. Mama? Merritt tightened her grip on the hammer. What is inside? She raised the chisel and set its point against the wall. The first strike sent white dust across her boots. The second opened a thin crack. On the 3rd blow, the stone shifted inward. Cold air slipped through the opening and touched her face. It carried the smell of old wood, iron, and smoke from a fire that had gone out many years before. Merritt lowered the hammer. Beyond the broken stone, something moved in the darkness. Not an animal, not wind. A slow scrape came from the other side of the wall. Then it stopped. Merritt did not strike again. She held the hammer near her shoulder and listened. The cave fire snapped behind her. Wren's breathing came fast and shallow near the bed of pine boughs. Nothing came from the opening. No second scrape. No footstep. No breath. Merritt moved closer and lowered one eye to the crack. Blackness. She lifted the lantern from its hook and held it beside the broken stone. A thin line of light slipped through. Something pale stood on the other side. It was narrow, still. Almost the height of a man. Merritt raised the rifle. Stay behind the blanket, she told Wren. He crouched near the wall without speaking. Merritt worked the chisel into the crack and pushed. A piece of facing stone broke loose and fell inward. It struck a hard floor. The pale shape shifted. Merritt aimed through the opening. Then the lantern light reached it. A coat hung from a wooden peg. The bottom had moved when the stone struck the floor. Merritt let out one breath through her nose. She did not lower the rifle. A coat meant a person had once stood there. The wall had been built. The room had been hidden, and someone had taken time to leave tools on her side of it. She widened the opening, one piece at a time. The stone did not break like the cave walls around it. It came apart along old seams filled with gray mortar. By late afternoon, the gap was wide enough for her shoulders. Merritt pushed the lantern through first. Its light moved across a stone floor. A wooden bed platform stood against one wall. Shelves had been cut into the limestone. A cast-iron stove sat in the center of the chamber. Its pipe climbed into a narrow crack in the ceiling and disappeared. Merritt stared at it. The room was not a rough mine shaft. It had been measured. Built, finished. The walls curved inward near the roof until each stone leaned against the next. Thick oak planks covered the sleeping platform. A small desk rested in the far corner. Dust lay over everything, but nothing had collapsed. She crawled through. Her skirt caught on the broken edge. A strand of hair pulled loose and stayed behind on the stone. She stood inside the hidden room and raised the lantern. The air was dry, much warmer than the cave outside. The mountain pressed around her, yet the chamber felt firm beneath her boots. "Can I come?" Wren's voice reached her through the opening. "Wait." She checked behind the stove. Under the bed. Inside a narrow storage space near the desk. No one. Only tools, jars, split wood, and the remains of a life left in place. Merritt returned to the opening and reached for her son. "Watch your head." Wren crawled through. He stood beside her with his wooden horse tucked under one arm. His mouth opened, but no sound came. The lantern showed shelves filled with sealed glass jars. A kettle hung beside the stove. A wool coat rested on the peg. At the foot of the bed stood a wooden chest with iron corners. Wren looked up at her. "Someone has a house in here." Merritt touched the stove door. "Cold." "Yes." "Where is he?" She looked toward the desk. A leather book lay in the center of it. "I am going to find out." She opened the book carefully. The first page had yellowed at the edges. The handwriting was small and pressed hard into the paper. March 14th, 1859. Ground is soft enough to cut. I will begin at the rear and work toward the cave. No one must see the smoke. Below the entry stood a name. Elias Vance. Merritt looked at the hammer in her hand. E.V. The room had belonged to him. She turned another page. Measurements filled the lines. Depth of the floor. Width of the stove base. Number of oak boards needed for the bed. How far the chimney crack ran before reaching open air. Elias had written as a builder, not a storyteller. Each entry told her what his hands had done. April 2. Removed 6 baskets of stone. April 9th. North wall damp after rain. Cut a drain channel. June 3. Brought stove in pieces. Firebox took 2 trips. Merritt looked at the cast iron stove. The road below had nearly broken her while carrying a child and 1 pack. Elias had dragged iron up the same ridge. Alone. Wren climbed onto the bed platform. "It is not cold here." Merritt placed the lantern beside him. "Not as cold. Can we sleep here?" She ran her hand across the oak boards. The wood remained solid. No rot. No soft places. "For tonight." Wren smiled for the first time since they left Silver Fork. That smile lasted only a moment. Then he coughed. His whole body folded forward. Merritt caught him before his head struck the wall. The cough came again. Dry. Deep. The same rough pull that had filled their Denver house during Caleb's final winter. She pressed her palm to Wren's forehead. Hotter than before. "Lie down." "I am all right." "You are lying down." His eyes stayed on her while she covered him with the blanket. Merritt opened Caleb's medical book beside Elias's log. 2 dead men lay across the desk in ink and paper. One had known sickness. The other had known stone. She needed both before morning. She searched the hidden shelves. Most jars held food. Beans. Salted meat. Dried apple slices. A dark jar marked willow bark. Merritt stopped. Caleb had shown her that word years earlier. He had made tea from the bark when fever climbed too high. She opened the jar and smelled the dry strips. Bitter. Sharp. Still usable. She filled the kettle from her water skin and opened the stove. Old ash rested inside. Dry wood waited beside it. But before she could light the match, she looked up at the chimney pipe. 27 years of leaves, dirt, or nests might be trapped above them. One bad fire could fill the room with smoke before she reached the hidden door. Merritt found an iron rod behind the woodpile. She removed the first section of pipe and pushed the rod upward. It stopped after 4 feet. She twisted. Something shifted. A dark mass dropped into the stove and burst apart. Leaves. Dust. A bird's nest packed so tightly it held the shape of the pipe. She cleaned the passage twice more. Then she lit the fire. Smoke climbed straight upward. No curl came back. Merritt watched for a full minute before closing the stove door. The room began to change. Cold left the iron. The stone around the stove warmed. Wren lay under the blanket, his face bright with heat. Merritt crushed the willow bark, dropped it into boiling water, and counted the minutes using her father's brass watch. The watch had stayed closed since Caleb died. Now its small second hand moved under the lantern light. One turn. Then another. Merritt whispered, "Help me count." She did not know whether she spoke to her father, her husband, or herself. She fed Wren one spoonful at a time. He turned his face away after the first. "It tastes like a tree." "It is a tree. I do not want it." "You do not have to want it." He looked at her. She held the spoon steady. "You only have to swallow." He drank. Half the cup. Then his eyes closed. "Wait, before we move forward, hold on to this moment. One mother, one sick child, and a room built by a stranger who had been dead for years. By midnight, the room had climbed above 60 degrees. Wren's fever had not dropped. Merritt sat beside him with one hand on his chest. His breaths came too quickly. She opened Elias's log again, searching for anything about medicine. Near the middle, 6 pages had been torn out. The next entry began with one line. "She is dead." Merritt stopped turning pages. 4 weeks later, Elias had written again. "My daughter Prudence died in New Orleans. She did not know I was alive. I built this room for her. I kept building after there was no reason." Merritt looked at Wren. His skin shone beneath the lantern. His fingers twitched against the blanket. She turned the page. Another entry waited. "If she never comes, perhaps someone else will. Leave the stove ready. Leave food. Leave tools where a desperate hand might find them." Merritt looked toward the broken wall. The hammer had not been forgotten. The chisel had not been lost. Elias had placed them there. For a stranger. For someone carrying a child. Wren's body jerked. His back lifted from the bed. The wooden horse fell from his hand and struck the floor. Merritt caught his shoulders. His eyes opened, but they did not find her. "Wren." His jaw tightened. A thin sound escaped his throat. Then his whole body went stiff beneath her hands. Merritt pulled Wren against her chest before his body slipped from the bed. "Easy, love." His arms stayed stiff for only a few moments. Then they slowly relaxed. His breathing returned in short, uneven pulls. She wrapped another blanket around him and kept one hand against his forehead. The heat had not left him. Outside, the wind struck the mountainside with enough force to shake loose fine dust from the ceiling. The hidden room stayed quiet. Only the stove answered with the soft ticking of hot iron. Merritt did not close her eyes that night. Every few minutes she dipped a cloth into cool water and laid it across Wren's forehead. She counted his breaths. She counted the seconds between each cough. She counted because numbers were easier than thoughts. Just before dawn, Wren whispered something. She leaned close. "Papa?" His eyes remained shut. "I miss him." Merritt brushed the damp hair away from his face. "So do I." He reached upward without opening his eyes. His small fingers found hers. Then he slept again. When the first gray light reached the cave entrance, Merritt opened Caleb's medical book once more. Several pages had small notes written in the margins. One sentence caught her eye. "Fresh pine needles and clean mountain air often help the lungs recover after fever begins to break." She closed the book. Outside, the storm had slowed. Fresh snow covered the ridge. She gathered clean snow in the kettle and boiled more willow bark. By afternoon, Wren's forehead finally began to cool. Not much. Just enough for Merritt to notice. She closed her eyes for a single moment. When she opened them again, she whispered one quiet word. "Good." Wren woke near sunset. His voice was weak. "Can I have water?" Merritt smiled without realizing it. That is the best thing you have said all week. He managed 2 small drinks. Then he looked around the hidden room. Did we dream this? No. It is still here? Yes. Then the mountain kept us. Merritt looked toward the stone ceiling. No. She looked back at her son. A man did. The next morning Wren asked to see the rest of the room. His legs still shook, so Merritt walked beside him. Together they explored every corner. The shelves held dozens of glass jars. Some contained beans. Others held dried apples, smoked venison, flour, salt, herbs and seeds wrapped inside cloth. Each jar carried careful handwriting. Every date stopped in the autumn of 1878. The same year, Elias had written his final entry. Near the desk stood a heavy wooden chest. Its iron hinges groaned when Merritt lifted the lid. Inside rested folded wool blankets, extra lantern glass, 2 sharpening stones, a hand plane, a draw knife, wood chisels wrapped in leather. Everything had been cleaned before it was stored. Nothing had been thrown inside carelessly. Wren picked up one of the wooden tools. Did he make things like Papa? Merritt nodded. I think he did. He must have been lonely. She looked toward the open journal. I think he stayed busy. Wren gently placed the tool back inside the chest. So the room would be ready. Merritt looked at him. Yes, so the room would be ready. That afternoon she continued reading Elias's journal. Most pages described work, repairing shelves, cutting firewood, planting beans, digging a drainage trench behind the north wall. But every few months one personal sentence appeared. Today I heard children laughing somewhere below the ridge. I stayed where I was. A person who hides too long forgets how to walk toward voices. Several pages later another line waited. If someone ever finds this room, I hope they arrive before winter, not during it. Merritt slowly closed the book. He had expected someone. Not a name, not a face, only someone. For the first time since leaving Denver, she felt less like a trespasser. The room had been waiting. 3 days later the weather cleared. Bright winter sunlight reached the cave entrance. Merritt stepped outside carrying the empty water buckets. She stopped after only 3 steps. Boot prints. Fresh. Large. A single man. The tracks crossed directly in front of the cave. Her breathing slowed. She crouched beside them. The snow still held sharp edges. Less than an hour old. She quietly backed into the cave. Without speaking, she lifted Wren into her arms. He understood immediately. No questions. No sound. Together they slipped through the hidden opening. Merritt carefully pulled the false stone panel back into place. Only a thin crack remained. The room disappeared behind solid limestone once again. She lowered the lantern. Neither of them moved. A few moments later, footsteps. Slow. Heavy. Someone entered the outer cave. The stranger stopped near the fire pit Merritt had used days earlier. She heard clothing rustle. Then the dull thump of a pack hitting the gravel. The man was close enough that she could almost picture him. He stayed for several minutes. No talking, no humming, only the sound of someone warming cold hands. Wren quietly reached for Merritt's fingers. She squeezed his hand once. The footsteps moved again. Closer. They stopped only inches beyond the hidden wall. Merritt could hear the man breathing. One hand slowly found the rifle beside her. The room became completely still. The stranger leaned against the false wall, the same wall Elias had built 27 years earlier. Merritt held her breath. The wall did not move. The man remained there for what felt like forever. Then came a tired sigh. Moments later, footsteps again. They drifted toward the cave entrance. A cold gust entered. Silence followed. Neither Merritt nor Wren moved. Not for another full hour. Only after darkness settled outside did she slowly slide the hidden panel open. The outer cave was empty. Near the cold fire pit lay fresh rabbit bones. A scrap of red flannel. and the print where a man's shoulder had rested against the very wall hiding them. Wren looked up. He never knew. Merritt nodded. No. He was right beside us. Yes. Did Mr. Elias build this so nobody could find it? She looked back toward the hidden room. I think he built it so the right people could. Wait. Before we continue, think about this. A stranger had stood only inches away. If that wall had failed, everything Merritt had fought to save would have ended that afternoon. She gathered the rabbit bones and carried them outside. Then she climbed back into the hidden room. Before sleeping, she opened Elias's journal once again. Near the final pages, she found a sentence she had somehow missed. Every wall I built has two jobs. One is to keep winter outside. The other is to decide who belongs within. Merritt stared at those words for a long time. Then she slowly closed the book. The next morning, she heard something far below the mountain. Not wind, not wolves. A hammer. One sharp strike. Then another. Someone else had come to Iron Crown Ridge. And this time, they were not just passing through. The hammering came again. 3 slow blows. Then silence. Merritt stepped outside before sunrise, leaving Wren asleep beside the warm stove. Fresh snow covered the ridge. The sound had come from the valley below. She climbed onto a limestone shelf where she could see farther. Smoke. Not one fire. 5. Then another. Wagons. Men. Horses. She counted until she reached 12 riders. They were spreading across the lower slopes, not hunting deer, searching. One wagon carried timber. Another hauled mining tools. Merritt lowered herself behind the rock. Someone had found Iron Crown Ridge. Whatever peace Elias had known was ending. She hurried back inside. Wren was already awake. He looked at her face before asking a question. What happened? She knelt beside him. People are coming. To live here? I do not know. But they are climbing this mountain. For the next 3 days she watched from different overlooks. The strangers marked trees with bright paint. They measured rock walls. They drove wooden stakes into the ground. One evening she heard laughter drifting through the valley. The mountain no longer belonged only to silence. On the 4th morning, Merritt opened Elias's journal again. Near the final pages, she found something folded between 2 sheets. It was another map, smaller than the first. On the back, Elias had written only one sentence. If strangers ever claim this mountain, protect the spring before anything else. Without water, the room becomes a tomb. Merritt unfolded the map. A narrow trail curved behind the ridge. It ended at a tiny mark shaped like a circle. She recognized the place. It lay less than half a mile above the hidden room. She packed a rope, shovel, lantern, and the old hammer. Where are we going? Wren asked. To find something Mr. Elias wanted hidden. The climb took nearly 2 hours. The trail almost disappeared beneath fallen pine needles. Finally, they reached a wall of moss-covered stone. Nothing looked unusual. Then Merritt noticed water dripping from beneath a flat slab. She cleared away loose leaves. A spring bubbled quietly beneath the rock. Cold, clear, hidden. She smiled for the first time that week. This is why he survived. Together they cleaned the channel. They removed fallen branches. Fresh water flowed again toward the hidden cave. Mama. Yes? He knew someone would need this. He hoped. Wren dipped his hands into the spring. It tastes better than creek water. It is. For the rest of autumn they worked every day. Merritt expanded the small garden Elias had once planted. She built a stone wall around it to keep deer away. She repaired the roof above the hidden chimney. She added shelves beside the stove. Wren carried small rocks one at a time. Each evening, he proudly counted how many trips he had made. 21. 34. 42. Winter returned earlier than expected. The first blizzard buried the ridge in only 2 days. From a narrow crack overlooking the valley, Merritt watched the mining camp struggle. Canvas tents disappeared beneath snow. 2 wagons overturned. Men fought the wind just to stay standing. She closed the stone panel and returned to the warm room. The stove glowed softly. Soup simmered in the kettle. Wren sat beside the desk, reading simple words from Elias's journal. "Mama." "Yes?" "They don't have a house." She looked toward the hidden wall. "No." "Will they die?" She did not answer immediately. The question settled between them. That night, another sound reached the cave. Not hammering. Voices. Weak. Someone was calling for help. Merritt opened the hidden panel just enough to listen. The voices came from outside the cave. 3 men stood in the snow. One held another upright. The third knocked weakly against the rock. "Anybody inside?" No answer came from the mountain. Again the man called. "We've got an injured friend. We only need 1 night." Wren looked at his mother. She remembered Denver. The bank. The long road. The empty cave. She remembered Elias writing, "Leave food. Leave tools. Leave the room ready." Merritt quietly removed several jars from the shelves. She filled a sack with bread, dried meat, blankets, and matches. Then she opened the hidden wall only enough to slip back into the outer cave. She never let the men see the doorway. She walked toward the entrance carrying the sack. The 3 strangers stared at her in disbelief. An older man stepped forward. "We thought nobody lived here." "I do." He looked beyond her into the dark cave. "We'll leave at sunrise." "You will." She handed him the sack. "There is another cave a 1/4 mile east. It blocks the wind better than this one." The man accepted it slowly. "You're saving our lives." Merritt simply nodded. "Keep your fire small." The men disappeared into the storm. She watched until the snow swallowed them. Then she returned through the hidden wall. Wren waited beside the stove. "You helped them?" "Yes." "Did they see our house?" "No." "Will they come back?" "I don't think so." He smiled. Mr. Elias would like that. Weeks passed. The mining camp eventually moved farther south after discovering poor ore. Spring melted the deep snow. Silence slowly returned to Iron Crown Ridge. One warm afternoon, Merritt climbed to the tall lodgepole described in Elias's journal. She found the quiet place where he had chosen to rest. She carried a flat piece of limestone on her shoulder. Using the same hammer she had found in the cave, she placed the stone upright beneath the tree. No long speech. No grand farewell. She rested one hand on the marker. Then she quietly said, "Your room is still full." The wind moved through the pines. Nothing else. When she returned, Wren sat outside the cave carving a small wooden sign. He looked up proudly. "I finished it." He handed it to her. The letters were uneven. Small. Careful. Home. Merritt looked at the boy who had arrived on the mountain too weak to walk. Now he stood straight beneath the afternoon sun. She placed the little sign above the hidden doorway inside the room, not where strangers would ever see it, only where those who truly belonged there would. That evening she opened Elias's journal one final time. On the last blank page she wrote, October 15th, 1886. My son is well. The garden grows. The stove still burns. The room you built has carried another family through winter. We have added more food than we used, more firewood than we burned, and more hope than we brought with us. If another traveler ever reaches this mountain with nowhere left to go, they will find this place ready, just as we did. She closed the journal, blew out the lantern. Outside, the mountain stood exactly as it had before either of them were born. Inside, beside the quiet stove, a mother and her son fell asleep beneath a roof hidden inside solid stone, while another year of snow drifted silently across Iron Crown Ridge.